What is happening, everybody? How are you guys doing? This is Rob of Ro2R Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about this bad boy, the Metroid Prime Trilogy. Oh yeah. So the E3 countdown is in major time mode right now because next week, some of the very early preliminary E3 events are going to start happening, and just a few days after that, E3 itself will officially kick off. As a lot of us know, Nintendo's E3 Nintendo Direct is going to be happening on Tuesday, June 11th, just over a week from now. Crazy exciting. So many things to start hoping and hyping and wondering for. One of those, of course, is Metroid. I have been discussing Metroid and some of my hype and build up to E3 recently, which might sound kind of weird because we know what happened with Metroid Prime 4, and we have no reason to expect Metroid Prime 4 to show up this year, which is devastating, of course, but we know this. This isn't a surprise to any of us. But I have been discussing different ways Nintendo might decide to surprise us with Metroid at E3 this year, and obviously, the game that's at the top of everybody's list is the Metroid Prime Trilogy. So what I'm wanting to discuss about the Metroid Prime Trilogy today is the true reality of if and when we might ever actually see this game get announced with some sort of port or hopefully a remaster for the Nintendo Switch. I know it's like the 10th video I've made on the topic, and hundreds of YouTubers, including many friends of mine, have discussed it many times, including on podcasts. I mean, I've even been on podcasts and discussed it. The Metroid Prime Trilogy has been this weird, mysterious vaporware idea that many of us have believed in, has had a lot of rumors and scuttlebutt and behind-the-scenes conversation happening for a long time, and that so many people want to see, and that so many of us believe is something that Nintendo is planning on doing. However, the game continues to ghost us. It has eluded us ever since the idea was first brought up, and it's pretty sad. It's a little bit frustrating, too. I think that I speak for a lot of people, a lot of gamers, Nintendo fans, and Metroid fans, when I say it's frustrating to be waiting and waiting for this game and still not seeing it announced. Now, of course, the argument exists that, hey, if Nintendo has never actually been making or planning on making a port of the Metroid Prime Trilogy, then we're not owed anything, and Nintendo doesn't owe us anything. And maybe this conversation started out of nothing, and so how could we maybe blame Nintendo, for example, for not showing us a game if they've never planned on making it for us anyway? The thing is, the Metroid Prime Trilogy conversation has been going on for so long, and very, very credible sources have discussed that they all but know this has been a plan from Nintendo for a while. So I know I've said this on a few of my own videos in the past as well, but, you know, I'm very proud to say that I feel like I was one of the people on the very early on discussions on the internet and on YouTube about the concept of the Metroid Prime Trilogy showing up on the Nintendo Switch. Within, I think, a month or so, a couple of weeks to a month after Metroid Prime 4 was first showed at E3 2017, I discussed in a video that, hey, you know, what kind of makes sense is the Metroid Prime Trilogy showing up. I mean, I had probably seen one or two comments sort of joking about the idea, which got me thinking about it being an actual reality. And so at this point for myself, that means I'm coming up on 2 years, as crazy as it sounds, of wishing and wanting and theorizing about this game. And in that past 2 years, since I and a few other people first started talking about the idea, there has been, like I already sort of alluded to in this video, some conversations from some notable sources about the fact that this makes sense to happen. And we all, of course, know the real big story about the Game Awards a couple of months ago in December, where there was 1,000 signs pointing to it showing up at the Game Awards. A lot of us believed it was going to happen. Behind the scenes people, notable sources, like I said, Reggie and Nintendo even making little teases and jabs at Metroid. Everything was aligning for the Prime Trilogy and or Prime 4 to show up at the Game Awards, and in fact, we got nothing from Metroid. And then, it was only a few weeks later, in January, that Nintendo confirmed what happened with Metroid Prime 4, the restart, the delay, the change in developer back to retro, and the fact that we now know we're 3 to 4 years away from seeing Prime 4, and many people brought up a good point that that delay very likely could have impacted Nintendo's plans for a Metroid Prime Trilogy, if in fact they were already in place. Now, I will go on record for the umpteenth time and say, I firmly am in the camp of believing that Nintendo has been planning and preparing a Metroid Prime Trilogy for the Switch. You could be in the camp of thinking Nintendo's never been doing it, and this is something the internet created out of nowhere, and that's fine, because that might still turn out to be true. For me personally, I've believed this for almost 2 years, and the things that I've heard behind the scenes, and even the things we've seen publicly stated by sources, all makes me feel that, yeah, this has been a plan, and it probably was going to show up at the Game Awards, and something with Prime 4 changed Nintendo's plan. All of this stuff now is going to bring me to the main concept I wanted to get across here in this video. And it's that after all of this time, all of this waiting and wondering, and so many of us just praying for Nintendo to do something so smart, I am at the point where, for me, I see E3, what happens in literally like 10 days from now, I see E3 as the last-ditch possible effort for Nintendo to show us Metroid Prime Trilogy. I think that if it shows up at E3, that's great. If we don't see the Metroid Prime Trilogy confirmed by Nintendo at E3, I will firmly state I don't think it's ever going to happen. And hey, that's a hard thing to hear. I get it. It's a hard thing for me to even think about, and it's even harder for me to admit that I sincerely believe that, you guys. And it's very difficult to reconcile stuff like this in your brain, where one half of your brain says, I've believed in the Metroid Prime Trilogy for Nintendo Switch port for 2 years. I believe it's going to happen, and then people started telling me it's going to happen, and so now it's really going to happen. And then the other half of your brain says, well, if it doesn't show up next week at E3, I think I'm going to believe that it's never going to happen. Those are very conflicting ideas, but to kind of genuinely believe both at the same time is kind of difficult, and it is a little bit sad too. I think it's a very sad and depressing concept to realize, or to at least think about in your brain, but that's where I'm at with this, man. The Metroid Prime Trilogy makes sense on the Nintendo Switch for the Switch audience and the Metroid fan audience for 1,000 reasons that we all know. And even more so now that the Prime Trilogy that Prime 4 has been delayed and is probably 3 or 4 years away. And as you've heard me say before, I personally believe Prime 4 is going to launch on the next console, not even on the Nintendo Switch. That's truly what I think might happen here. And so the Prime Trilogy just fills a perfect void. It gets people excited. It reminds them Metroid and Samus are around and that they matter. It gets people, newcomers especially, familiar with the concept and the playability of the Prime formula, because it is a very unique and specific formula. And it would be killer to play Metroid Prime, any one of these 3 games, on your Switch portably. Can you guys flipping imagine how amazing that would be? And then, of course, you know, the excitement around if they actually change or upgrade or evolve the game in some way. We would all love an HD polish to the graphics, maybe something more in terms of a remaster. You know, some people have even started floating out the idea of just a Metroid Prime 1 remaster as opposed to a Metroid Prime Trilogy port. And, I mean, sure, I would go even for that, I guess. I think I would prefer the Trilogy port or remaster, but even if Nintendo was going to give us just the first game, that's fine too. I mean, bring it on. Like, Microsoft did that with Gears of War, and that actually was really great. I would love to see Nintendo give the first Prime game, my favorite game of all time, the same treatment. But when I focus back on E3, I think it just makes sense for that to be the time that Nintendo would choose to show this game. If there's any truth to the idea that for the last year to even 2 years, Nintendo has been thinking about and planning a Metroid Prime Trilogy port or something to the Nintendo Switch, if they've been truly thinking it, and all of these things happen, the Metroid Prime 4 delay, didn't show up at E3 last year, didn't show up at the Game Awards, hasn't showed up in a Nintendo Direct, at this point, if they don't choose next week's E3 Nintendo Direct as the time to finally show the world and all these fans who've been waiting for this port that it actually does exist, then I don't see any other time after that being a good time. And so that's why I am all in on E3 next week, you guys. That's truly where I am with the Metroid Prime Trilogy. It is either E3 or it is nowhere. I don't think Nintendo is going to be giving it to us. And hey, the great thing is, let's pretend Nintendo pulls something wild and they turn out to reveal it at the end of the year. I am totally prepared and okay being wrong at that time, and you guys know I will happily make my video and say, man, was I ever wrong, because it didn't show up at E3, and I said that was their last chance, and then they showed it. And so that's a problem for future Rob and for future Nintendo fans to deal with. Like, we're not going to think about that. I am specifically focused on the fact that it just makes sense. Why would Nintendo wait beyond the biggest and best moment where everyone is looking at them, E3? Where there's competition in the news as well. Nintendo can steal that competition and shine through by announcing big major things. Yes, they need stuff and surprises for Nintendo Directs throughout the year. Absolutely, I do agree with that. But I do not see Metroid Prime Trilogy as one of those worth saving anymore. I feel like they've been saving it for months, if not a year already. And so if Nintendo has been continually keeping the Metroid Prime trilogy in their back pocket, they see the conversations and the hype online, they see our videos, every time a Nintendo Direct is going to happen, they know people are waiting to see it, and then they don't give it to us. So if Nintendo has truly been holding this surprise in their back pocket, there is no better time than next week at E3. There just flat out isn't. I really firmly believe that in the depths of my soul. So that's where I stand. I am planting my flag in this opinion here. E3 or bust for the Metroid Prime trilogy, man. Man, this would be so great, you guys. We all want this thing on our Switch so badly. You know, like I just have been yelling at you guys about for 10 minutes here. It would be so incredible to have one or all three of these games on the Switch, even if they weren't HD, even if they weren't remastered or whatever. I mean, just do straight ports. Just do something. It would be so incredible. It belongs on the Switch. Metroid, I should say, belongs on the Switch right now. And this is the perfect time. So I guess we'll just see what happens, man. You know, we are a week away from E3. It's very exciting. I expect great things, even if we don't get the Prime Trilogy or anything Metroid. I do expect a great show. I'm not hinging the quality of Nintendo's presence at E3 on Metroid or the Prime Trilogy. But, you know, I've spent this whole video telling you guys I think that this is the time. So for all of us who've been dying and waiting and hoping and wishing and wanting this to happen, the Metroid Prime Trilogy on the Nintendo Switch, I personally believe now is the time. So let's put our positive energies together. Let's put all the good vibes we can out there into the world and into the ethosphere and into Nintendo's headquarters and say, give us this game, Nintendo. We want it. We deserve it. And it would just be amazing to see. And everybody wins. Nintendo makes so much money. Nintendo reminds people why Metroid is great. Nintendo keeps people invested in that series. And it makes the fans happy. And they make money and we get a game we want. And it's just a win all around. I mean, it's ridiculous at this point for it to not happen and for it to not show up at E3. So these are my thoughts and opinions as a diehard Metroid fan that you guys know I am. And I cannot wait to hear what you guys have to say about this. Do you think I'm being too severe, too harsh, and too stubborn on putting all my chips on E3 next week and saying if it doesn't show up there, it's gone forever? Or does my case and my argument make sense? I definitely want to hear whether you agree with me or whether you don't, and what your overall general thoughts on this whole concept is. So with that being said, this video is a wrap, and yeah, so that's it. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.